Dating back to 1947, the SAT has been the most popular form of standardized testing for students who apply to American universities for many decades. Every year, millions of students from the US and around the globe gather on select dates in the hopes of achieving a score that will get them into their dream university. And if their first attempt failed to live up to expectations, some even take it multiple times. In this video, I'm here to tell you all about how I achieved a near-perfect SAT score on my first try. Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Max and I am an incoming freshman about to study at UChicago in September. So in this video I want to talk a little bit about my SAT experience and how I scored so well on the SAT. I took the SAT and I scored a 1590, which is obviously an incredible score. And in this video I'm just going to talk about how I studied for the SAT, how I managed my time, and just general all-around tips to score well in the SAT. Keep in mind that while this guide is going to be quite general and not really dive into the specifics of each section, I will in the future be making a lot of videos about specific section of the SAT, like reading and writing and math no calculator and math with calculator. I lost my 10 marks in reading and I got a perfect score for both math and writing, so if you want to know how I did that, then you can stay around, subscribe, and look forward to future videos. To do well in the SAT, you got to be both fast and consistent because the SAT is seriously a long test. Because from when you head into the exam room to when you get out, 3 to 4 hours will have passed depending on whether you took the optional essay or not. So while conceptually most SAT questions aren't the most challenging, getting hundreds of simple questions right still isn't easy. And one mistake can cost you more points than you might think, because some test curves have been known to be as harsh as -40 for your first mistake in math or writing. On my test, I think the curve was relatively nice compared to the nightmarish ones that I just mentioned. 2 wrong in reading was only -10 because I know that because I got 2 wrong in reading and I got a 1590. However, writing and math were different stories. I think even though they weren't as harsh as some of the tests, they were still pretty bad. So I don't remember the exact curve exactly, but I don't think it was very pretty. So my baseline goal was to not get anything wrong in writing and math because the curves for these sections are generally much harsher than for reading. I think this bottom line is pretty much required if you want to get a score above 1550 because chances are you'll get a few wrong in reading, maybe -3, -4 on average, and you won't have any more score to give away. And even for those who aren't looking to get that ridiculously high score and just want to get, say, 1400, maybe a bit above that, which is generally like probably the bottom line for most elite universities in America, it's best to allow as few errors in math and writing as possible when one mistake can get you 20% of the way there. But while the curves may be quite hard, most of the questions aren't really hard, which is why I believe everyone can get pretty good at least at writing and math if they do enough study. The reading section can take a bit more intuition and instinct, but the math section mostly consists of basic algebraic concepts you probably would have learned in the beginning of high school, like linear algebra, quadratics, or drawing a couple of graphs, basic data inference, things like that. And most of the content in writing is just basic grammar rules, like how do you list things with a comma, when should you use a semicolon, when should you use a dash, and when should you not use a dash. Things like that you can just learn from a textbook, and it doesn't necessarily require much actual thinking. So since the SAT isn't a hard test, its difficulty mainly comes from the sheer volume of questions that you have to do, and of course time pressure, because I think that's what most people struggle with the most. You get 65 minutes to finish 55 questions in reading, you get 35 minutes to finish 44 questions in writing, 25 to finish 20 questions in no calculator math, and 55 to finish 38 questions in math with calculator. So as you can see, for 3 of the 4 sections, you get on average a bit over a minute per question, and for writing, you get only 45 seconds per question, which is pretty fast. And of course, you want to finish faster than that generally because you would ideally want to check over your answers once you finish the test. So in essence, the SAT is challenging you to know your stuff and know it well enough to quickly apply concepts to SAT-style problem solving. What this means is you not only have to know the concepts well enough, but also be very familiar with what kind of questions the SAT is actually asking. So if you're making a lot of mistakes on practice tests or practice questions, it's either because you don't know some things or you aren't familiar with how the test is conducted. Depending on which one you are, you should study with different focuses. So if you're looking at questions and going, I have no idea what this is asking, or I have no idea how to solve this, chances are you need to step away from crunching SAT papers a little bit and probably just study some of your basic concepts. If you're able to do pretty much all the questions individually, but you're taking way too long or you're making silly mistakes, then more practice under test conditions is probably what you need. So for the first kind of people, the concept people, don't focus so much on SAT questions right now. It's much more important that you solidify your understanding of tested concepts, because SAT can test about one concept with a variety of different question types. So your best shot is to understand the concept well enough that you recognize when and how to apply the concept to different types of questions rather than trying to slog your way through every single type of SAT question, when in fact there are a lot of times when they'll introduce new types of questions that you just won't know because you don't actually know the concept, you just know how to do the questions. So honestly, at this point, I think resources like school textbooks are pretty good, and things like Khan Academy courses or just even watching YouTube videos online, they're pretty good because you're trying to learn the concept, you're not trying to do the test. So in fact, what you're doing in school should probably actually help you, especially when it comes to math, because when you're doing algebra in school, then ideally it should help you reinforce your understanding of algebra overall. At this point, you don't need to worry about getting extra SAT specific books or, doing a lot of SAT papers. Forget about the SAT for a week or two. Just knuckle down and learn what you don't know. Forget about the SAT at this moment. But if you're in the second group and you're the group that doesn't know how to do the SAT but knows what they're doing generally, your practice should be centered around the SAT and quite methodical. So first you want to identify what kind of questions that you're getting wrong the most and just do a ton of them. And this is when books like Erica Meltzer's Guide or Barron's SAT can come in quite handy because they have specific subsections for different types of questions, and they also explain quite thoroughly why each choice is right or wrong. And this is also when the SAT section in Khan Academy can come in quite handy because similarly they also have targeted practice designed to target your weaknesses. At the same time, you want to be doing full sections of practice test, ideally once or twice per week under time test conditions. And while you're doing them, you should set target times for yourself that are less than what you're given. So for example, you're given 35 minutes for writing, try to finish within 30, and then once you're familiar with that, try to finish within 25. If you're given 25 minutes for the no calculated math section, then try to finish it in 15 minutes. It's doable, I promise you. And you want to aim to at least give yourself 10 minutes or so per section to use on actual test day to check your answers. And then a week or two before you actually take the test, this is when you want to start doing full papers under full test conditions. Give yourself the whole time, take your breaks in between, triple check your answers like you would on the actual test day, because what you're trying to do is to simulate a testing environment so you're mentally prepared for the actual test day. A question a lot of people tend to ask is whether they should get tutoring or not, and I think tutoring can be quite a good resource because it is always better to have someone hands-on to explain to you in detail, because humans, they understand what you're actually trying to ask, and not just books that you have to try to find answers in. So I think tutoring can be quite helpful, but you don't need to have a tutor to succeed in the SAT. I did go to tutoring. I went to tutoring like every Sunday for a couple of months. And my tutor was quite helpful because she helped me categorize my mistakes, and also she just had access to a lot of practice papers that aren't necessarily available online through Khan Academy or College Board. So I think tutoring can be quite helpful in the sense that many tutors will have extra resources that most people won't have access to, and also because they can just explain things much more clearly, and because they're humans, obviously, they're not just books. So you can get a tutor if you want to, but if you can't get a tutor, if you can't afford one, if you don't have time for one, doesn't matter. People have succeeded in the SAT without having a tutor like plenty of times. I'm pretty sure most people probably don't get an SAT tutor, and I've seen people jump from scores like 1030 to like 1530, 1540, 1560. So massive jumps in score like that from all of their own practice, that's definitely possible and should be possible for pretty much everyone. If you do get a tutor though, don't substitute your tutoring time for your practice, because just getting a tutor once or twice per week isn't enough. You do have to do a lot of practice on your own as well as getting tutoring. So while getting tutoring isn't necessary, if you do get tutoring, don't forget to do your own practice as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Studying for the SAT isn't something only geniuses can do. It doesn't have anything special that you gotta do. It's just about a ton of practice, whether you're practicing conceptually or whether you're practicing based on the SAT specifically. Since the content in SAT isn't necessarily very difficult, I'm pretty sure that everyone can get quite good scores if they just do enough practice on their own. So get studying, I guess. Again, if you're interested in my thoughts on specific sections like math and writing and reading, then you can stay around and subscribe so you can be alerted for future videos. And yeah, that's pretty much my guide to how to do well in the SAT. Don't forget to like this video, and I'll see you guys next time.